Hello everybody and welcome to this evening's show. Yes, I accidentally shaved. It will grow back. Don't panic. That's what I had to repeat to myself frequently. Okay, so I see a lot of people in chat, which is fantastic. Yes, we are, as Mega Traffic Cone points out, 12 subscribers away from 200,000. It's absolutely insane. It is insane. So there we go. That's why we're celebrating. That's why we're designing this campaign. I have been a little busy behind the scenes. So I've got some interesting stuff for you tonight, hopefully. Now, I did launch a poll on the community tab of our YouTube channel to see what we want to talk about. Now, if you didn't see that poll is still there. If you go to the YouTube channel, How to Be a Great GM, you'll see our community post there. I see there are already 268 likes, so I don't see what the voting is. I'm going to open up that voting now. And okay, interesting. So I said in tonight's stream we have a few things to cover. Vote for what you'd like to discuss the most. And so what has come up is, of the three options, which is possibly adventure options. So possible adventure options. Nope, we're keeping away from that. Altering magic and divine power. Nope, we're altering against that. We are going to be designing some factions tonight. So we're going to be designing some factions tonight. That's really exciting. I love designing factions. We've got some very interesting options when it comes to designing factions. And Laura Bones, our moderator in chat tonight. Laura Bones, thank you very much. It's been too long since we last chatted or played a game together, Laura. I hope you're doing well. So there you are. Right. Inky Design says, I hope the Choco oat milk is Oatly. It's here, and it's going down pretty well. All right. So that's what we're going to be talking about, designing factions. Let me show you what I have done in the meantime. Now, when you are designing your own campaign, I have always maintained that you need a map of some kind. So last week we worked a little bit on the Deos software. That's Deos in alpha, and so that Deos software we worked on, I will show you what I did there. Let me bring this one, he said. Yes, okay. Let me get out the way there, because Deos, nope, wrong overlay. Where is it? Here. This one, I will just magically float over to there. So I went back after what I had done, and I have just retooled it a little bit, dropping in a few little pieces here and there. Now, bearing in mind, this is still alpha version of Project Deos, of the Deos suite software, so it is still very rough around the edges. I'm still learning how to use some of the shapes and things, and I'm completely distracted because Inky Design has just said I'm going to come up with a dairy-free banana milk recipe for you. To be perfectly honest with you, I haven't even thought about combining bananas and just oat milk. I mean, I figure that's how they've made chocolate milk. I don't know. And I'm very excited about that. The only problem is that makes it a very calorie-heavy drink, which I'm not going to get into it, folks. All I'm going to say is I'm currently 14 pounds down, 7 kilos down in about 3 months of doing what I've been doing. Thanks completely to my partner, my boyfriend. He's been absolutely fantastic on a calorie controlled diet. So I'm looking at what I drink, and it's like this is 100 calories, but I saved up for it today. I kind of skipped out on this and that, went for a long walk. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is here we talk about maps and faction building. So I have gone in and I have reworked this a little bit. So let me zoom in here. This is the joy of Deos. So this is about the level that the players would need the map at. We don't need to go in any tighter than that, I don't think. So somewhere around here would be a pretty good space, I would say, in terms of our view. So I've dropped in a yurt. I've dropped in a portal here. Now, again, I believe that we decided that the portals would be floating above the ground about 100 feet up in the air so that anyone coming in would fall through, but they wouldn't be able to get back up and out of those portals without some kind of engineering. So I've gone through, I've redesigned this. They had some cool little features in there, which I absolutely adore. A giant mountain turtle thing. I think it's absolutely amazing. But the attitude of this thing, its little face there, Kaora doing the assets here for Deus, just absolutely stunning. I see there's a floating tower here. Why can't I? I've got to choose a selection tool, get that tower, and just move it somewhere. I sort of popped and littered towers here and there. I was playing around with a sort of just whatever was in there. That's what I was looking at, and just sort of dropping things in. I've got the island selected now. I went in and put in some river systems. I realigned the mountains so that we have some valleys for a very specific reason too. It wasn't just random. One of the things that we find, especially when we look at early cultures in areas where there's a lot of rivers, or just in general in areas where there's a lot of mountains. Mountains are very, very important things in terms of how humans exchange information. When you have lots and lots and lots of horizontal mountains, so mountains, vertical mountains, I should say, running along the length of your continent or along the length of your island, whatever the case might be there. It separates people like you cannot believe. Crossing mountains is incredibly dangerous, it's incredibly difficult, and it creates very different biospheres, biomes that are going to create very different types of settlements. They're going to have different types of problems. Chile is an example that is, I think, absolutely perfect. The same as with the Brazil sort of situation there. It limits trade, as White Tiger 225 points out. Absolutely right. That's vertical mountains. Horizontal mountains change things. It means that cultures can expand along those mountains and the food groups can expand along those mountains. Now, this is very important. Now, I speak a lot about this in my podcast, my weekly podcast. We talk about this. And when you think about it, a crop that you grow in this band, so let's, for example, say this was a very big map and crops grown here. I hope you can see my cursor wiggling around. Actually, I can probably make us a little. Let's just do it here. So very, very quickly, this will help you one day, I swear. No, it won't. Okay, so let's say we're doing some crops here at this area. This is an arrow pointing to this area, right? Those crops will grow here, they will grow here, and they will continue to grow here in this band, because that is, generally speaking, the same temperatures, the same kind of climate is there. These same crops, which are used to growing in a very wet environment, let's say it's wet, when you then bring them down here to a very dry, and you can't see it because I'm an idiot, so let's say you bring it all the way down there where it's a very dry climate, those plants will no longer grow. So plants move very easily in their own band, but they don't move up or down very easily. Crops don't move up or down. So that's an important factor to bear in mind as well. So when you start to have mountains that separate the coastal side from the water side, from the inland side, you're going to get two very, very different types of people growing. You won't get much trade happening between them. When you then start to cut your spaces with big rivers, which is what I've done here, you are also going to isolate. I'm just going to get rid of these little island arrows so we don't confuse ourselves. You are also going to limit trade to a degree, but you can build ships to cross that. But what we're going to find is that the crops that grow up here are not necessarily going to grow down here. So there's very, very limited kind of exchanges happening that way. So a good example of that is when you look at Europe, you have the northern part of Europe, which is very different from the southern part of Europe. The food preferences were very different. There was a whole bunch of very large differences, you could say. It's apples and cider in the north, it's grapes and wine in the south. Why? You can't grow grapes up in the north. It just doesn't work so well. As a bad example of my understanding of European geography. So I made this little map. This is all that you can basically do within Project Deos at the moment. You can see it says here it is a technical alpha 0.2, so it is still very basic. I don't even think this is the updated version. I think there's a new version that's come out. It's like 0.2.1. I see there a lot of folks are writing in questions. That's really useful. Thank you. To put the word question in caps lock. I completely forgot to talk about that. Caps lock. Put the word question in caps lock, then I'll see it sticking out there. I see there's one. Sorry, Kyle Graham wrote, how are you able to tell what size the grid is, or are you just guessing based on how it feels? Which links into Nicholas Morrow's question, can we use Deos now? You can use Deos if you go and sign up as or if you were a backer on their Kickstarter, I believe. Head on over to their website. I'll type it up in chat. That's www.dungeonfog.com. Head on over and look for Deos and you'll see there some information. So with regards to the grid, yes, this is a feature that they're going to be adding in. Hopefully soon they're going to tell us what this grid size is. What I am personally saying, if I look at this kind of scale here, I am going to say that each one of these blocks is a mile, 1 mile long. So these are not necessarily very big rivers at all. They're a couple miles in length. Definitely not a large river at all. But then these mountains, maybe a mile is too long as well, too short. Maybe it should be 5 miles. I don't know. Without having a solid scale at the moment, I don't know. The important thing, and this I think is really useful, given the campaign setting that we are going to be doing, the player characters won't know distance either. So what I could quite happily say and run this campaign without ever knowing the distance here is that I could say 1 block takes a day. That's how long it takes to get across, as it takes a day. So that's really useful. That's actually even more useful, I find, than saying it's actually 1 mile or it's 10 miles, etc., etc. So simply because it makes it more practical, immediately practical, I should say, for the players. Oh, it takes us a day to cross one of these blocks. Okay, cool. Now, because the scale keeps changing as we zoom out, Dungeon Fog calculates all of this stuff. Deos calculates all of this stuff for you. And they will have a little slider scale in there. So it will be a lot more user-friendly from that perspective. Anyway, okay, so I have now done this map. It's very, very basic. And to give you an idea, folks, by the way, of this region map, when we zoom out, if you didn't see last week's stream, I'm going to pull out just so that you get an idea of how small that region is. I'm still going. So this is an island chain of fairly large islands, maybe not even the size of the UK. These are small islands, comparatively speaking. Okay, so I have made that, and with that, I'm going to close that. This takes me to worldanvil.com. Now, I'm going to World Anvil for a very specific reason. Before we get into designing factions, I wanted to show you what else I designed with regards to this campaign. Now, if you watched my video this last week, I was like, well, we don't really need to plan out giant campaigns anymore. It's really not necessary if you understand the fundamentals of storytelling and of adventure building based on what I've been talking about on this channel for years. So I haven't designed any of that kind of stuff. What I have designed, though, is the nuts and the bolts, the stuff that I need in order to be able to run this game straight away. If I needed to run this game tonight, I could with what I have now built. I've got my map, so I have some basic geography that I can fill in as I go along, and I needed a few basic rules. Now, the most important thing is, I'm going to answer their Mixer 9000. It is streaming live to YouTube and to Twitch at the moment, and it will be available on the YouTube channel under the live shows, as was last week's episode. So you can go and check that out. All right. Last week I did do a mix-up. I confess I did. I streamed to the wrong GM channel. So now at least it's going to the right one, which I think makes more sense. So there is that. Okay, so I have been using World Anvil. If you're not familiar with World Anvil, worldanvil.com is an amazing aggregator of content, just absolutely amazing stuff. And when you create a new world, what I really like about the new system is that they now start to populate articles for you, prompting you for stuff. So for example, I created this world. Literally, I just went create world, and it added in these three things: staging area, world encyclopedia, and world atlas. So they automatically prompting you, hey, you probably want to talk about the fauna and the flora, the deities, the organizations, the ethnicities, the science and technology. So they're creating some prompts for you to start to fill in already on your campaign design and your world design. I really like that. And they've got so many tools in here, it's absolutely insane. I'm going to show you some of the tools that I've used already. So I created another category called rules. Now, our player characters are going to get dropped onto this world that we've created, onto this place. And they are going to have to survive. That's the bottom line. So recently I was playing Minecraft just to see what it's all about. And I have to admit, it's a pretty fun game for a good long while. It's very distracting. But I have played many survival games, such as Ark and 7 Days to Die and all those kind of things. They're lots of fun. They are lots of fun. But the majority of it, as far as I'm concerned, the majority of it is building cool stuff. That's really where it comes into it. As far as I'm concerned, it's about building cool bases and those kind of things. White Tiger 225, I feel your pain. I can't play Ark because they added Titan boas in a couple years ago, and that broke me. So yes, that really, I have a complete phobia of snakes. I couldn't do it anymore. So I'm hoping Vanaheim, which is another survival game. I've just bought that now. Everyone seems to be playing that. It's set in the Viking sort of inspired genre. So if they are snakes, they're giant world snakes, and that's okay. So anyway, they're too real, and that's a problem. Right, now, let's see. Other questions. Nicholas Morrow says, can you ask Till, that's the owner and creator of Dungeon Fog and Deos, to create Earth in Project Deos as a reference tool for us geography-challenged mappers? Oh my goodness. So Nicholas, creating Earth is insanity at its best. You know, when you look at fantasy maps, you go, oh, this is a giant world. And you go, no, it's not. It's really not. You don't have nearly enough cities. You have enough cities for a province. You really do. Most fantasy maps don't come anywhere near close to what they should be in terms of designing a world. If you think about doing a fantasy map version of Earth, which is an interesting thought experiment, what would you include in Southern Africa? Would you have one city called Johannesburg or Cape Town? Would you have London, Manchester, and then possibly Edinburgh on the UK map? I don't know. How many would you add in? Anyway, it's an interesting thought. And yes, I will definitely ask him to do that because I think it would be curious. I'd be interested to know the answer to that. Dastin_TV says, is this tool good for making futuristic sci-fi based maps? Well, Deos definitely will be capable of making any kind of map. Science fiction is definitely one of them. You can already do science fiction maps in Dungeon Fog. So there we are. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, okay. Arok von rocks a lot. This is a small island chain. These are continents like Australia. Yeah, I revisited that. Okay. Right. Let's see. What I was talking about. Oh, yes, the rules. So our player characters are going to get dumped on this world, and one of the cool things is they will be able to make their own structures, their own bases, their own towns, their own settlements. But how to do that without rewriting Dungeons and Dragons book from 2nd edition called The Complete Guide to Castles. I think it was called The Complete Guide to Castles, or The Guide to Castles. It was an amazing book, so influential in my personal life in terms of creating castles, but also in terms of creating mechanics that didn't do what this book did. This book sought to really get into the nitty-gritty of designing a castle, and it had modifiers if you were building in swamps or if you had wood nearby. It was really like playing a spreadsheet. Computer game type of simulation, which for a 15-year-old me, I was not interested in. I wanted to be able to build castles in a cool and quick and efficient way. So I've kind of drawn from what they've done, and I've said, okay, well, we need to figure out how people are going to be able to scavenge stuff and then build stuff. I also happen to have a wonderful personal background or history. I grew up in a rural farming environment where I had access to a workshop, and we used to make everything from swords to sleds to little wagons and things. We had, well, I had anyway, a wonderful childhood growing up doing survivalist stuff and then going camping and surviving as well. That has enabled me certainly to be able to roughly guesstimate the build times for certain things and to come up with a little bit of a system. So the system that I came up with was, I said, all right, so in order to be able to build stuff, you have to gather stuff. So this is the article that I made, survival foraging. So I said, all right, using Dungeons and Dragons as our base, because ultimately that's what pretty much everyone plays. What are we going to do? Well, and it's a really small table, and I don't know how to increase its size. So I'm going to artificially do that by zooming in Chrome itself. So remind me to change that back. So I have made a table where I have said perception, nature, and survival. Those are the three survivalist skills that I think would be really useful in terms of getting fundamental building blocks. You could make arguments that Arcana could be useful. But I kind of went with, well, one of these three, right? This way also, by including perception, almost anybody could go foraging. Nature and survival are perhaps a little bit more specialist kind of skills that will only be taken by the rangers and the druids and a few individuals who are more interesting in that. I see Extreme says to change the font size, you'll have to go into the CSS. Now you're speaking craziness as far as I'm concerned. I know CSS are lookup tables in World Anvil, but I have no idea how to program them. Anyway, I digress. So what I did was I said, okay, you are going to spend why didn't it put that in there? That's interesting. Okay, you're going to spend an hour searching for searching for salvageable stuff. What will that result in? So if you're using perception, if you spend an hour, this is all based out on hours, you would then roll your dice. So I'm going to roll here. I'm going to use the random roller within Dungeon Fog. And look, I scored a 15 or a 16. I roll there. I add in my modifiers, and then I check what number I get. So you get 5B and 1R. What I did was I broke down all of the components that you could gather into two categories, a basic or a rare, a B or an R. Now, basic stuff is wood, fibrous plant material, clay, that kind of stuff, simple stuff. Rare stuff is things like high silica content sand, maybe some crude iron, maybe some copper, basic stuff that you could find lying around. After all, this is pretty much what we did when the world was young and we were still learning how to do all this kind of stuff. So there is that. So a person using perception would get 5 basic stuff, 5 basic and 1 rare. Someone who is using nature or someone who's using survival, I increased that slightly, not for nature, but for survival I did. And the gap sort of increases as we go up. Again, once... just trying to say, well, you took nature, so you should be better at finding stuff than someone who's just good at looking for stuff. Because you know where to look for stuff within nature. Anyway, it's all right. It's fine. Did I say Dungeon Fog? Every time I say Dungeon Fog when I'm using World Anvil, or World Anvil when I'm using Dungeon Fog, I have to take a drink. Okay, so there we go. And the number that's not presented here, because I probably broke the system, is 20 plus. So if you roll a 20, you can get 6 basic stuff and 3 rare stuff within 1 hour. Okay? All right, so what I then did was I have bald-faced stolen or been inspired by, however you want to pronounce it. I have had that information given to me from playing the... Maximum Apocalypse role-playing game, which I had the benefit of running a couple times and playing it a couple times. It came out last year, I want to say. And they had a similar idea for scavengers in a post-apocalyptic world. So this is basically where I drew that inspiration from, saying, you know what, we're breaking it down into two things, basic and rare. Excuse me. So there you are. Did you add a description of a forged material's potential use, or do you let the players guess? For example, this vine has great elasticity. It could be used for rope or bowstring, says Mega Traffic Cone. Right, so I did not, and I'm going to show you why in a little bit. Okay, so I did a little bit of a write-up. To survive, you've got to do, this is what you can find. How much they can gather in a single day is dependent on which skill they're using. Sorry, so this is per day, not per hour. I was wrong. Per hour is the building thing. Okay, so per day, the maximum you could get if you're using survival is 8 basic items and 5 rare items. Okay, now we're not going to show, we're not going to tell our players anyway what those specific things are, because you would have to be a survival expert, a handicraft expert, all those kinds of things in order to create those rules in the first place. And then your players would need to have that same kind of ingenuity, which if they haven't grown up with it, they're not going to necessarily have. So all that we do is then we wash out the system and we say, right, so constructing basic equipment, I said here it takes the amount of time it takes to construct an item is equal to its rare resource cost in hours. This can be halved if 2 people work on the item, quartered if 4 people work on it. Most humanoids can only work for 10 hours a day. And if there is no R cost, it takes half an hour. Is that right? I might have to revisit this. This is not necessarily a perfect system, folks. Okay, so I then went through and listed everything that I could within the Dungeons & Dragons equipment list that made sense. And I broke it down into the cost of basic and rare. So it doesn't matter what the players are finding. It doesn't matter that they've got an elastic vine or a strong vine. They just need X amount of basic items and X amount of R items, and then they can combine it. Now, they also don't need to build a forge and a work table and work tools and all that kind of stuff. Again, it is just too much admin, and I don't think that that component is necessarily what the players are looking for. We want this to enhance their gaming experience. We don't want it to detract from the gaming experience. Overcomplicating it is great for people who love to crunch numbers. But if the majority of your party are there to kill monsters, kick ass, and, you know, get the gold, they don't want to sit there working out. They've got 5 bits of glass, 3 pieces of this, 4 pieces of that. Oh, they can make this. They just want to know, I need to make a battle axe. Cool. It's going to take 12 basic items and 15 rare items. I'm going to have to search for rare items for 3 days before I can make a battle axe. But that's okay, because I'll be collecting basic items along the way. So I have done this for most of the equipment, which I think is plausible to have within this world, or which is plausible to be able to be made with finding stuff all over the place. It is a long list. It did take me quite a long time to enter it into it. Now, before you start asking the next question, when it came to working out the values and costs of these things, I didn't do it. I literally didn't do it. I should have done it by taking the gold cost that they used in Dungeons & Dragons. Except that I have worked with that list previously when I was doing the Complete Guide to Nautical Campaigns, and it's junk. I don't know where they got their numbers from, but they made them up. So using that as a basis is just doing wrong on top of wrong. So why not just make up your own values based on guesstimation? So if you say to me, I want to make a torch. A torch, for example, is not just a bit of wood. If you want to make a good torch, you might bind several pieces of wood together. You need one rare item, which is oil. So, right, you dip oil into those, you soak them in the oil. You need some fabric, which you can wrap around it, or some vines, which you can wrap around it. So it's going to take you probably a day to make, it'll take you a day to gather the resources and make a good torch like the ones that they have in the DMG. A trident. A trident uses a lot of metal. The shaft might be wood, so that's why it's got 10 basic items, but the actual prongs, the tines of the fork itself, that's all made out of metal. So that's rare elements. You've got to make a mold to put the rare, you can pour it in, and off you go. All right, so that's basically where all of that came from. So that's the equipment. So this is the part where I think the players are going to go, hey, you know what? If we don't have equipment, we can go make it ourselves. That's fantastic. That is also something that I have felt that is definitely lacking from Dungeons and Dragons rule sets in terms of crafting your own items. I know it's there. I definitely know it's there. But it's so obscure and so complex that no one ever seems to do it. It's also because that's not the game. Okay, that's not the game. So the idea is to make it fun and entertaining. All right, so here's your basic items, your armor and your equipment. Great stuff. So the last thing we need to do is we need to be able to build our base. And so it's the shortest list of the lot because when you break it down into stuff that's actually of interest, it's not a very long list. Especially, and this is because I was playing Minecraft and have played other survival games as well, where physics don't apply, it becomes a lot more interesting and a lot easier to do. So we then go, okay, building a 10-foot long, 10-foot high, 5 inches thick wooden wall. It's going to have a toughness, hardness of 5 and 35 hit points. Okay, that's pretty standard stuff. And it's going to take 20 basic resources to build. It's as simple as that. Go chop down 25 trees and you're going to put these trees together to make this kind of wall. It doesn't talk about how the wall is lashed together with vines and reeds, and depending on how you want to build it. I have helped build grass huts which use wooden frames that you bend and weave into each other. It's time consuming, but within a day you can build a pretty solid wooden frame. The next day you put your grass over it and then you're done. So the idea here was to be able to build these 10-foot blocks which you could then stack and turn into whatever. The next idea, and this is something that's always been perplexing, is that you say, all right, well, in the original Castle's handbook, you had to accommodate for your height. So I think it was for every 20 feet up, you had to go 10 foot out. So if you wanted a 30-foot high wall, you had to have like a 30-foot wide base and then a 20-foot wide and then a 10-foot wide or something similar to that. Because that's how we had to build things during the medieval period. The Romans didn't because they knew how to build stuff, right? That is not useful to us in terms of building our base. We want to build a giant 20-foot high wall. Okay, cool. There's no need to pull out a calculator. You're going to build 2 sections of 10 feet. You're going to stack them on top of each other. If you want to stand on top of that wooden platform, you have to build another 10-foot thing and put that on top of that. So it's very basic kind of stuff, but it allows your players to create some cool things. So I did wooden walls, I did clay walls, I did stone walls, and I did thatch walls, grass walls. And that's it. That's all that I did. Some stone stairs and then excavating, digging stuff out. People love to dig out stuff. Yes, absolutely. I'm sure you have watched those time-lapse videos of the Indian builders who literally dig out a swimming pool and an internal chamber that they then can sleep in. They never show the video of the monsoon rain filling that entire thing up and drowning everybody inside it, but they show you how they build it and how very, very easily and quick and simple it is to do that. Simple once you know how. Let's rephrase that. So then I gave them some basic stuff: wooden table, wooden chair, wooden bed, wooden chest, and then a rope bridge, plaited rope type of thing, and off you go. Because if you really want to expand this list, you can. And it's straightforward. Just add on more stuff to it. The idea of thickening walls, stack 2 walls together, but your hardness, it doesn't change. It doubles up for the first stacking, and then it remains the same. So, yeah, that's pretty much what I did there. All right. So, half an hour in, those are the rules that I have now added to this entire system. And yes, it is public. You can find it. Arka Valos, You can go and look for it. It is all public. It is all available to you. This is all under the SRD stuff of Dungeons and Dragons anyway, so you can go and look for it. How you share that, I would have to ask Laura Bones. I don't know how to share stuff publicly, but if you go to World Anvil, I believe you can search for Arka Valos, and then you can have access to all of this stuff. Okay, so there you are. Right. Let's see. Eric von Roxalot says, for foraging and survival, consider adding a daily constitution roll, because not everyone can do it. Fails equal disadvantage on foraging rolls. Success equal advantage on foraging rolls. I have done something to a certain degree like that. So if we go back to those foraging rules articles, what I'll show you is that when you fail a check, or if you get very low scores, you actually lose hit points. And every day you have to consume at least one meal, and as a result, that meal, I believe, costs like 3 basic. So there is a cost to foraging, there is a risk to foraging as well. Whether you want to bring in an advantage or a disadvantage, that's entirely to you. I see Inky Design has shared up the World Anvil page. Thank you. That's in Twitch. I've shared it for you all now on Twitch and on YouTube. So, all right. So that these numbers, by the way, are totally up to debate, and you can change as you so need to. This was just something for me to be able to have to give my players. So now I've got my map. I've got my basic rules and what things will cost when my players start asking me these questions. We are done. We can start playing in this world tonight, as far as I'm concerned. It won't be a particularly rich environment, but that's okay. The very first session that we're going to play, if it takes 4 hours, I'm going to say literally, right, guys, are we ready to play? You've all got your characters? Fantastic. Strip away all of your equipment and all of your items and make me a dexterity saving throw. Because you're falling out of a portal and landing into an environment. That's literally what I will say to them, is this is it. Thanks for playing, folks. This is what's going to happen. And then they're going to start surviving and that sort of thing. Now, bear in mind as well, sorry, let me just get that number back there. Bear in mind, of course, that the trick is having made sure that they are keen on playing a survival game. That's absolutely critical. So there you are. All right. I don't know what chat's talking about, so that's fine. I'll catch up with you guys one day. If you do have questions, just remember to put the word question in caps lock in front of your question, and I will try and answer it. Hopefully I can see it. Okay. So with World Anvil now done in terms of our basic rules and our basic map, we want to start talking factions. And within World Anvil, they even have a category for organizations. But where do you start with organizations? How do you start with organizations? And I think, well, to be absolutely honest, we need to start somewhere. And so you need to choose. I like to start bigger picture stuff. And so previously, 10 minutes ago, I've put it in the oven and now it's ready for me to take out and share with you is that I have brought the map from Project Deus into the program that will do the thing and not give me words. I have brought it into Photoshop, and we will now be able to manipulate this. You don't have to use Photoshop, folks. You don't have to use any of the software that I've been using if you don't want to. I use World Anvil because it does a great job and it keeps all my stuff together and I don't lose it. I use Deus, or will use Deus once it's finally finished. I use Deus now because it does a job that I wanted to do. I use Photoshop because we pay for it monthly because we use it all the damn time. But you can use whatever you like. That's simple and easy and straight away. So I'm going to zoom in here on this map. Now this is a screen grab because the exporter is not yet working from Deus, or at least I couldn't find where it exported stuff to. That's not a problem. We don't need it to be high resolution for this. What we need to do is we need to work out our factions. So this is literally how I do it. I create a new layer. Now, I could do this within World Anvil itself. I can make multiple overlays and that sort of thing. I'm just more comfortable doing it here for the time being. So I am going to create some zones. Now, traditionally, again, our factions usually will use rivers as natural boundaries. Rivers, mountains, that sort of thing. That's pretty much what we will use as well. So if I look here, there is a nice big natural boundary. So I think we've got probably from about here and around. I'm just doing this roughly as well. Probably not that island. They'd probably come into here, and then they wouldn't range into those mountains. I don't think there'd be much control over these mountains. So I'm just going to minus out the mountains very badly. Okay, again. And again, when you then start to look at this, you say, okay, what gives a faction its power? Where does power come from in terms of a faction? Now, by faction, we're talking here controlling of territory. And controlling of territory requires troops, or at least presence that can say, hey, this is our territory. So territorial expansion is usually only, especially when we're talking this kind of situation where we've got a lot of little colonies, little spaces. We haven't got giant developed trade. We don't have a mega city. There is no way to support that. There is no giant industrial farming going on, at least not that we can see on this side of the continent. So we've only got little chiefdoms. Little chieftains means what? It literally means numbers. So if you have a village and your village has 1,000 people in it, how many of those individuals are you going to employ to patrol your territory? Are you going to employ 100 of those 1,000? Are you going to employ 2 or 3 or 400 of those 1,000? How many do you need to employ in agriculture and food gathering? I'm guessing the majority of them. So the whole idea of working out how many people, I'm not saying you have to do that. I'm saying keep that in the back of your head and go, well, if they have a big territory, they've got a lot of influence. That territorial control as well, by the way, usually extends as far as a person can walk in a day. Once they have horses, then it extends to possibly as far as a horse can move in a day, which is not double a human's distance, but it's pretty good distance going, right? So if I look at this territory, this is my whole long-winded point, by the way. I look at this territory and I go, at the foot of this mountain, to follow this river up here, why? Why would you fight over this piece of land? If there is any kind of contest, your warriors, wherever your base is operated, is going to have to cross this little river first and then fight for this territory. Unless there's something significantly valuable in there, we're not going to fight over that. So thanks for playing, but we're actually going to cut this out. And we're going to cut out that little island because you know what? It's a mud pit. We don't care. So this starts to become the look and feel of our territorial space for this particular tribe. I'm just going to neaten up the edges here. Right? Okay, so we possibly have a tribe that lives here. I'm going to give it a color. We're not yet going to work out its names and things. We're just going to fill up that space, right? And I'm going to make it multiply. So we can, maybe let's just do, I don't know, overlay, right? Okay, so we have a faction that controls this green territory. We then have another faction, let's say, because we want some kind of conflict. Whenever you look at these kind of scenarios, one of the things that comes to mind is the natives versus the invaders. Those that consider themselves to have been from the planet or have had multi-generations worth of birth in the planet versus those who are newcomers. Our players are newcomers. That's the whole hook of our campaign. We shouldn't move away from that. So when you then start to say, okay, well, how do we make that conflict happen? Those that have been here for a while will have the best territory. They'll have sussed it out and gone, well, this is a good space. This is a good space. We want that space. The newcomers will be pushed to the fringes if they're not accepted into the existing culture. So we need to create, in my opinion anyway, a strong controlled space that our main enemy faction are going to have. And I think if I look at this map, where is the most valuable land? That's got to be this space here. Yes, there's a bit of a swamp thing going on down here, but there's forestry, there's lots of rivers, and there's lots of open plains for fields and crops and that sort of thing. There are some mountains for mining. So I think this would make an ideal territory. And I think they'd claim that little island. I don't think they'd claim that one. They'd come up here. They'd come around here. And because they have the resources, they'd go all the way up to the mountain's edge, I think, and all the way around here. They wouldn't go there. They wouldn't go there. They wouldn't go there. They'd go there. Again, they're not going to dogleg around the side of the mountain. Why bother? They're not going to control these swamps either because they don't need it, and we could put some monsters in there, right? Okay, so we're going to do that, and let's make that faction, because they're our primary faction, let's make them red. Okay, so there we go. So we now have our second faction. We don't know what the green faction is. The green faction could be a bunch of nomadic tribes that move around that Great Plain and hunt for that sort of thing. I'm just going to plot out some factions that we can use, and then we're going to move on. Now, we are also going to have a lot of unclaimed territory. There are a few reasons for this. One of the reasons is the PCs need to be able to claim some territory somewhere, and we need to have room for our monsters. Not everywhere is going to be controlled by individuals. People are not going to go searching and finding things. So we've got some interesting spaces on the map that just so happened to exist by random placement. We have another little territory here, which is this weird tower control thing. And as far as I'm concerned, it's probably just going to do something like this. It's not going to control a huge territory. They don't need to, for whatever reason. Maybe they're self-sufficient. They're self-sustaining. You know, who knows what's going on there. I see Mars Anonymous says there are some nice river deltas you have there. It would be a shame if they became the den of pirates. Yes. And in my World Anvil list of things to build, there are ships that you can build. It's going to take the players a long time to build a ship. But once they've got a ship, the sky's the limit. All right, so we're going to put a faction there, and then we've got another faction here. This could be quite a nice long faction. When you look at factions, you've got to be careful, and this is a lesson that we learned from Star Trek Voyager. If any of you are fans of the Star Trek show, I use it frequently because it's a great example of spectacularly good ideas and spectacularly bad ideas. One of the bad ideas that Star Trek Voyager had was prolonging the amount of territory that our poor heroes had to travel through. I'm not going to give you any spoilers in case you decide to go and watch the series, but let's just say that for an entire season they were fighting against one species, which seemed to have a vast amount of territory and just never ended. The species was incompetent and not really particularly dangerous against the crew of the Voyager, and so they kind of lacked any teeth. When they started to then fight against people who had really lots of power and would have destroyed them in a heartbeat, they had to come up with some pretty sneaky ways of getting around that. The point I'm making is, if you're going to make territories that your players are going to be moving through, violating, crossing into, make sure that they're not so big when your players are on foot that it's going to take them so long to cross that they are never going to get there. Inky Design, that is absolutely amazing. I am working through Deep Space Nine with my partner as well. We've done TNG, we're on DS9, but I am skipping certain episodes that don't need to be watched. We're just sort of getting the main meat of it, and then we'll go back later on. So there you go. We're on season 2. We've just watched the albino episode. Great episode. Okay, so I'm just going to create... You know what? I think that's pretty good for now. I'm going to create one little faction out here because I think it would be quite fun to have this mysterious faction. So, one of the other things that you need to be particularly vigilant about when creating factions, there is no point in creating factions that the player characters will never learn about. I know there are others out there who say, no, you must create all of the factions so that you can understand the political dynamics of your world. And I go, great, I don't understand the political dynamics of my own world. So I'm not entirely sure how the players are going to understand the political dynamics of a fantasy world that exists entirely in my head, but good for you. At least that's what goes on in my head. I just smile and laugh. Okay. All right, so we have another faction that kind of controls that area. So if we look at it, we've got a few factions here, which is all that we really need. We don't need that many at all. Faction green here, let's make these a little bit less irritating. Faction green here is going to be in conflict with faction red. Red has some pretty good farming lands, but green has a huge amount of farming lands, which is really nice to take over. Okay. Aside from that, let's say green has a propensity for coming down across onto this little island and, you know, doing stuff, which irritates the red folk. These guys are never going to get contacted by anybody. To get to them, it's 1 to 3 days of journey on foot from the red territory. Yes, it's only 1 day journey from this sort of lemon territory. But if you're not welcome, they have a very small bottleneck that they need to protect. They only have to patrol that little space between the two mountains, and you just can't get in. And so that's a fun little space for us to drop in some cool stuff. Now, there was a wonderful suggestion on last week's episode where there was an idea that perhaps these portals also were used as dumping grounds for getting rid of books and spells and all kinds of items and devices that the worlds did not need. Now, if those books were collected by a famous collector who travels around the region buying these useless things because they're written in languages no one can understand, you can't eat a book, really. You can use it to make fire, for sure. But you know, that's something to think about. So this green region might contain that. If our players are starting, let's say, way down here in the south, unless they hear the rumor about the book collector, Wolfsbane, absolutely thank you for that donation. Really do appreciate it. I'll come to your question shortly. If our players are down here in the south, like way down here in the south, and they're busy trying to survive, not only have they not encountered any of the other factions, but when they do encounter Lemon Faction, for whatever reason, once they encounter Lemon Faction might tell them what's going on around them, but it probably won't. So we don't really have to plot this out just yet. We can leave it nebulous until our players start going, oh man, I really wish there was a spell book place here somewhere. Ha ha! It just so happens that on your next adventure, you come across a person who's trying to collect books because he sells them to the mysterious book buyer who wanders around buying books. Where does he come from? Oh, he comes from up north. We don't know where. Then we need to find him. They follow him back to this territory where they get rebuffed. You are not educated enough to be here. Go away. Then they will find it's a whole grand ruse and there's a monster in there that's actually lording over everything and it's absolute chaos and it's a whole long adventure chain because we didn't plan out what was in there, so we didn't get the urge to tell our players and to give our players this information for free. It's all about just finding out what needs to go on. So that is what we're going to be doing in terms of that. This red zone, we don't want our players to go to the left. We don't want them to go into the mountain regions. It's boring out there. Look, it's just sand. But if we put in a bunch of carnivorous, cannibalistic types of individuals, that's a different story altogether. That's a really different story. So that is how we're going to use our factions. We're only going to develop the ones that we need at the moment because we are going to keep these others in our pockets going, well, maybe the reds over here, maybe those islands, maybe they're home to those pirates. I mean, that could be really useful if we needed to. Because the PCs could then come in there and actually provide support and flush out those pirates and get into an alliance with red, who then ask them to take on green, whom we haven't spoken about before with the PC, so now they're going to describe that. So there is that to bear in mind. Now, we're coming to the end of tonight's show. Can you believe it already? Scabbard GM Vault says, would you share this map with your player initially? Or is this revealed in game? I wouldn't share it with them. I would not share it with them. I would leave it, let them discover. I would maybe say, okay, you get to see this little corner here. From what you can see, there's a giant mountain range to the west. To the east, it seems to be sea in all directions. To the south, it's heavy forest. To the north, heavy forest and maybe a river. So that's all I would give them. They don't get this map. Where do they get this map from? Maybe Lemon has a crude map. And then I would draw them a very rough, very crude map for them to have a look at. But that's it. Okay. So that's all that I would do. Yeah. All right. Now, very quickly to Wolfsbane, who asked the question, what advice would you give to a first-time DM who's doing a one-shot? Understand the idea of the one-shot. What was the essence behind the one-shot? So why did they create it? What did they think was fun about that? Then focus on giving that to your players rather than on giving the specifics, because you can become overwhelmed. And when your players start diverging away from what's in the one-shot that you've planned, you're going to panic unless you remember what the goal of that one-shot was. If it was to allow the players to explore a new world, let them explore the world. Don't worry about what the one-shot is saying, okay? So that is definitely something that I have to say there. Now, I think there was something happening in Twitch as well. I see there people are saying that's very generous. I believe White Tiger did a donation. I don't have Twitch open, and unfortunately I don't get to see that. So I'm just going to quickly log in there, because if I owe a thank you to someone, I want to give it to them. Oh my goodness, I've got to log in here with Twitch, and I think it's going to ask me for my code. Oh my goodness, give me a second here, folks. I really want to make sure that those that need it get it. Where the hell did I get my code from? You're now watching a YouTube Twitch streamer panic. It's been so long. Was it Authy? Did I use Authy? No, that's for Battle.net, right? Panic. And nope, that's something else. I'm going to have to go and find that. And then I thank you to whomever did anything that got people to say that's amazing and generous, and that's very kind of you.
Acknowledge
I
us.
think it was Shush. So yes, thank you so much for that. White Tiger gifted 5 subs. Okay, thank you. White Tiger 225, really do appreciate that. Thank you so much for that. Thank you all for watching tonight's show. And remember, you can catch us all on discord.gg. Why am I saying this out loud? Discord.gg/greatgm. And next week, we will continue with these factions. We're going to take these factions now, and we're going to work them out, how we're going to use them with our players. But already we are pretty much good to go. We've got a few things left to do, and then we're done. So there we are. Folks, thank you so much. We will see you all again next week, same time, same channels. And until then, just remember, it's chocolate oat milk or nothing.